Rick should be back next week. So
I forgot about him.
Truck troopers fall through an endless sky. Military sound and science fiction contest. Free action in the system on fire. Military sound and science fiction contest. Short stories every Wednesday. Military sound and fiction contest.
all right, today we are talking about humanitarian missions, which could be outside the realm of what you might expect from normal military sci-fi, but it's something that if you spend any time in active duty or were in the National Guard, you probably did something related to a humanitarian mission, a civil support mission, something that was outside the realm of your mission. Because one of the things that I loved about the military, from my perspective, actually, that I miss a lot is when you just have 100 competent people. Well, I shouldn't say competent. We're talking about the Army. At least I am. Jeff is too. But when you got 100 people sitting around with something, that need things to do, and you put them towards on a project, they make things happen, and that's pretty cool to me. So, but anyway, why don't we? I think that, obviously everything's happening in North Carolina and Florida right now, and our hearts go out to everybody who is there, and we hope they stay safe. Um, but it was Jeff who I think was inspired by, there was some video floating around of Chinooks dropping hay for, farm animals. But I've got a story to tell, but does anybody else have any?
Oh, I've got a
Humanitarian?
couple.
Yeah,
We
go
did
for it,
we
Jeff.
did a bunch of humanitarian missions when I was in.
Yeah. You want to go for it?
Sure. Just Josh, did you guys do? I mean, you were nuclear silo security, so I
I
can't
mean, we
imagine
did
they
them,
pulled
but
you
I
guys
was
off that
never.
much.
We did them. Actually, there was a whole group of SF guys, well, security forces, that went to Katrina when Katrina happened, and I was in then, and I was scheduled to go, and I can't remember why I didn't go, but the active duty Air Force guys do it all the time.
I think something that a lot of people are surprised to learn is probably 70% of the military's missions outside of an active war zone are humanitarian missions. If there's an earthquake anywhere in the world, the United States Navy is there within 24 hours, airdropping supplies and food. I mean, like anywhere in the world. I mean, they have. I remember a few years back, there was that big earthquake in Chile, and they had an aircraft carrier off the coast in no time. Then they had one that was like a big earthquake in Turkey. So I know it was kind of funny seeing the memes pop up from this, not Milton, Helene, let's call it Helen, saying, so where's all the money pouring in from other countries to help us?
Right.
And I'm like,
Well,
yeah, no, when I was in the Army in it starts 19, so it's a long time ago, 94, there was a really bad wildfire season that year in Montana. And so my unit was the 497th Trans unit, and we were tasked with driving all the way to Montana from Fort Lewis and Kalispell, and then assisting 2nd Infantry as they fought fires in the mountains near Lake Kukankanusa, which is the largest man-made lake in the United States. It's pretty cool. And it was really, I mean, I was 19, 20 years old, and it was my first introduction to this is the military when you're not fighting a war kind of thing, because there wasn't a lot going on. Bosnia hadn't happened yet. Mogadishu was over. We pulled out of
let's see.
the name
Somalia.
of that place, Ethiopia.
Ethiopia. Oh, yeah.
And
That's the thing. There's so many we can just name off.
I
Multiple.
just can't think of the
We're still
name of
getting out
where.
of Desert Storm.
All I can think of is Black Hawk Down, right? It's just like wherever Black Hawk Down happened, because that happened while I was in the Army. And I had buddies over there in the 2nd Ranger Bat. And so we rolled up our 5 tons and we drove for however long it took us to get, I think a day, to get to Kalispell. And I can date the exact day that we were there because we had a break at one point about halfway through the process, and we went and watched True Lies in the theater there, which
Nice.
I love that movie.
Great movie.
Yeah, you kill people, they're all bad.
Yeah, but they're all bad.
They're all bad.
And so
That had the dance scene with Jamie Lee Curtis. I digress. Um,
and then yeah, so we were at a Forest Service camp that had like these giant silver tub, like the kind you would see at a dairy farm, right? For hundreds of cows to come around, filled with ice and nothing but sodas and Snapples and whatever. We got there and we set up all our tents and stuff, and they're like, because we had to stay in the medium, B tents, and they're like, yeah, you can have all the soda you want. And then for dinner it was like really good steak and spaghetti, and the Forest Service just treated everybody there who was there civilian wise. They all had like brand new trucks because the Forest Service just paid them an enormous amount of money to be there fighting fires. We were there for 30 cents an hour. And,
well, I've done planning on the civilian side, and they always want to get the National Guard because they don't pay for them.
yeah. Well, the food was good though. Yeah,
Right.
the food was. I mean, food was worth it. So yeah, I mean, I have a couple of stories from that period that were probably my most. Like when people talk about like, oh, do you have any stories from the military the most interesting? I've got three, and two of them happened here. Three really. One, I don't like talking about the other one though because it was like soured me a lot on the Army. I was put up for an accommodation for something I did while I was there, and somehow the paperwork got messed up or whatever, and they gave it to this other guy who was about to go to the brig for assault on me. In the incident. So I'm just like, so we get back and like we're all standing information, and they're like, oh, we've got this great news. There's I forget what the combination was, like good conduct medal or something like that this officer put me in for, and it's like, and it goes to private. And I'm like, and it's like they call out this other guy who was literally arrested while we were there because he had some kind of psychotic break and attacked me, and I had to defend myself.
That usually messes up the good conduct medal.
And I was like,
Yeah.
and I held the guy down until somebody came over to help me. And then we went to the sergeant, and the sergeant's like, oh, well, he's got some problems. He's got some issues going on outside the military that you don't know about. And I'm like, okay. My hand was all torn up. I had to stay in the tent for a couple of days because he bashed my hand in the side of a 5-ton. And then we get back, and I'm just like, I look over at my platoon sergeant, and he's just my squad sergeant, and he's just shaking his head like, don't, because I was always kind of
Really?
I had a hard time standing for injustice. I'm not really a sit by and watch injustice happen kind of guy. And it turns out later on, after I got out, I got informed that the first sergeant hated me, and he had it out for me, and that's why all this bad stuff happened to me my last 2 years in. First 2 years were great. Last 2 years were horrible. But anyways, I digress. But yeah, we fought fires, and we transported people, and we rescued people, and it was awesome. It was like one of the most like wholesome kind of things that you can do in the military. Is go to a natural disaster area and clean up and help people, and and there's who better to do it than 19-20-year-old kids who could march forever. Like, hey, go up into the mountains 30 miles and go fight fires up there for 8 hours and then come back down. It's like, sure, that's easy. I've been through basic training. What are you talking about?
It's better than mopping the parking lot when it's raining.
Exactly. I mean, be able to do a cool mission, serving your country, helping out people that are actually your fellow Americans. I mean, it really doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah, I was watching the videos coming out of North Carolina, and the Army guys they're all over it. Watching them airdrop hay onto cows was just awesome. And so to bring that to around to writing in military sci-fi is that I try to sneak into subplot every once in a while of the Navy, the Alliance Navy or the Alliance Marines doing something that is not war related,
right?
That is, shows that, because a lot of times people get caught up in this idea that the military is the military and they just fight and they train to fight and blah blah blah, and they don't do anything else. And it's good to remind people that no, there's lots of aspects of the military service that isn't fighting, and that's good to have that in fiction too, because people will forget it.
Well, like we've talked about before, it gives a lot of depth to the writing, and for the people that don't know, it may be like, oh, this is neat, and for the people that know, they'll respect you and give more credence to the story you're telling just because they know that that's true. It's a thing that happens.
I think it's a great opportunity to show characters being competent, doing stuff that is the same kind of skills and can create, if you're looking for ways to create tension or build character or have a side story about something, like there's no reason they shouldn't go do that. And I think one of the oftentimes I find myself when I'm writing getting a little caught up in a lot of the BS that I didn't like laws and active duty, like making people do dumb things or doing dumb things myself. But if you're even if it's a side mission that is still worthwhile, well, now we don't have to deal with any of that dumb garbage that goes into like the training garrison environment. Like nobody really wants to read about that unless it's funny, I guess. At least I don't really care to read about it.
And natural disasters are going to happen.
Right.
No matter where, no matter what time period you are. I mean, fires are still going to be fires. Earthquakes are still going to be earthquakes. And I mean, I'm sure you could cite some reason why earthquakes don't affect cities, but I don't find that particularly realistic. And I got an email recently where the guy's like, "I don't find your technology plausible." And I was like, well, it's all based on real science. I mean, it's real stuff. Some of it's, some and I inferred some things from the science, but I'm like, it's all 100% realistic. And he's like, oh no, it's not that I don't find it realistic. I just think 1,000 years in the future they would have much more, high tech stuff.
Sure. We've
And I was
talked
like,
about
yeah,
that.
but I mean, I put a disclaimer in the back of the third book saying, like the whole reason the technology is the way it is because I wanted to keep everything relatable to the characters and to the readers. Also, I don't really go into the history of the galaxy, so you don't really know what happened. There might have been some
A
sort of
Butlerian jihad.
yeah. Well,
Right. Russian.
and I actually do talk about how they don't use advanced computers because they're too easy to hack, and that everything is hard coded on firmware to prevent enemy ships from hacking your computer systems. The code simply cannot be changed, and that limits you to what you can do um, on a ship. And I have mentioned also in my books that the other vessels have civilian vessels tend to have much higher technology, stuff like that. But so like keeping it, so unless you're writing in a world that has like basically magic level technology, natural disasters, asteroid impacts, ships in distress, people stranded on a planet because their ship crashed. That's all stuff that's going to happen and is, fodder for great fiction
Yep.
and
I think
realistic because
sometimes
the military does that.
I think sometimes too you can I don't know that I've done this in any of my published novels, but I've had the idea um, for a long time using, like you just said, like ships in distress, not necessarily a Coast Guard action, but say a military vessel is going to render assistance, and then through those actions, the story takes place. Like they have some kind of twist that happens while they're rescuing the people, or they figure out they were transporting some kind of whatever it is, right? Some kind of illegal thing or something that is stolen from somewhere. Like you can always kind of take those things and play around with them, and those those missions do take place all the time, and they're kind of fun to use as either staging points for a bigger story or just part of the story that you're trying to tell.
My main big humanitarian story is that I was at Fort Bliss during 9/11, which dates me. Not as bad as Jeff,
Ah,
but and so we get into work that day. We had PT, go home, like start seeing, that's weird stuff happening on the news, and then immediately get a recall back to post. And it's basically all about like what we're going to do to divert traffic to a lot of folks don't realize there's another major Army airport in Fort Bliss, El Paso area called Biggs Army Airfield. And so it could receive commercial aircraft. And we prepped the airfield to be ready to receive aircraft. And it was it was a perfect Army kind of thing. Like the main drama I had that day was like a knockdown drag out fight with my defect sergeant because I was going to pull all the cooks out and send them to Biggs Army Airfield. And he's like, "No, I got to feed people at dinner. We're not doing that." And he was right ultimately, but that
ah!
But it was, you could have a huge event in your world, or an event could happen in the world, and then all of these other side pieces of it can kind of reflect, just like in the Avengers, the way the Battle of New York kind of reflects through the other parts of the Marvel universe. I thought that was something cool that they did, that they realistically looked at the effects of that on actual people. But
Yeah.
that's the thing, like 9/11 had, you know, we were dealing with that for days, because after we jumped through our rears to make that happen, then we had to clean it all up. Uh,
Hmm.
but then I got to do another cool thing for the 60th anniversary of D-Day. I was stationed in Germany at the time, and we did security for the ceremony when George W. Bush and Jacques Chirac were speaking, and we had um, folks at all the various locations on Normandy and Pointe du Hoc, and we, you know, escorted VIPs. And that's a great opportunity when you think about if you want to rub your character up against some other kind of cool character to have them learn something. I mean, that was just amazing. That was like one of the biggest events of my life, quite honestly. Getting to meet the people that had been there and talk to them and how humble they were. Just like, damn, I'm still here. Like they were very, very cool people. But that's the kind of thing that for me, that's had a huge impact on my life. And it was one of those things that we were actually in the midst of not knowing if we were going to go to Iraq or not. And now we have to go do this while we're getting ready to go to Iraq. So it's like take a thing that's like underlying stress and now put a cool thing on top of it that's more stress, but whatever, you go do what you got to do, right? And it was just awesome to step out of a one role and move into another one and shine our boots like crazy so we could be in the ceremony. But that's the kind of thing that I think the military traditions and things that people enjoy about the military, and honoring a military tradition in your stories, you can do that with your characters. And I've been trying to think of examples in fiction that I've seen a lot of that, and I can't think of anything. I mean, maybe I feel like Honor Harrington had ceremonies like that, and Bejeweled. I don't know. Can you guys think of anything?
Poor Man's Fight, which is one of my favorite military sci-fi novels. That the sequels were good, but I mean the first
Uh,
one was something special. Had stuff like that too. I mean, I've got a couple on some of the back of my novels where it's like there's like a lot of the missions that the interceptor goes on are secret, so they're usually like secret medal ceremonies and stuff like that. But it's like it's good to throw that in every once in a while
mhm,
to give your audience, because there's something inherently rewarding about a scene like that if you've earned it. If
mhm.
you've
I
earned
did that at the end of Stryker's War. I based the loose version of the story off of um, Dakota Meyer and his Medal of Honor, the thing that he won the Medal of Honor for. And so throughout that book, I was quoting lines from a death letter that one of the characters had written to his parents, but you didn't find out who actually wrote the letter until the end of the book when that particular character dies. And at the very end of the book, I have the ceremony where he's getting it's called the Order of the Centurion in that series, but basically the Medal of Honor. He's getting awarded that posthumously in a ceremony. And so I had I basically kind of copied the what the order would read for the Medal of Honor, and I kind of changed how the official kind of vernacular worked in the order, and then I had them present it in the way that it would be presented as a Medal of Honor, and did the whole attention to orders, da 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 da, and I had the character read that, and then you had the presentation and all of that, and then I had the final like completed death letter at the end of the book, and I got so many um compliments from service members about that presentation, but also I got a lot of emails that were basically cursing me out because they started crying because they had experienced that like personally, where they had lost a friend or they had had a friend that got a medal and was injured or whatever, and they had sat through that same exact ceremony.
Didn't
um
Meyer beat an enemy insurgent to death with a rock?
yes, he did. Yeah,
Dude was
crushed his
pretty
skull
good.
with a rock. Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's a firefighter now. Actually, good
No,
guy.
it's so funny. Is there's a reason why so many military guys go from being military to being police and firefighters. And one of the things I think a lot of us have in common is the desire to serve. And
Mhm.
those are the ways to do it.
Not necessarily beat people in the heads with rocks, but to serve the community.
Yeah, well,
Wasn't sure where you're going.
you know,
Well, and two, kind of stepping back to the humanitarian aspect of things, um, there it's very easy to do humanitarian. I say it's very easy. It's not easy. I don't mean that in that way. You can do humanitarian effort missions, CONUS, or you can do them overseas, and you can do them in friendly countries, and you can do them in non-friendly countries. And
Mhm.
doing them in non-friendly countries, presents its own challenges, and presents, you know, uh, really good story fodder for a situation where you're on the one hand you're trying to save people and to feed people and to clothe people and you're legitimately doing the right thing, and on the one hand you're fighting uh insurgents or whatever it is. They're either stealing the goods or preventing you from delivering them or whatever. And I like those kind of stories, um because a lot of times you deal with military guys going in to kill the bad guy, um but that's it. And the military mission in general is so much bigger than that, and especially in terms of in theater, depending on what the situation is. Like if it's a world war or something like that, it's kind of different. But if you go into like, with Mogadishu and on all of that, they were having problems delivering the supplies and the
oh
food and all of
gosh, I
that.
had buddies on the helicopters when they were dropping
Yeah,
off supplies. They were always so pissed.
yeah. And I think scenarios like that are excellent to talk about and excellent to kind of highlight in your stories.
Yeah, James, helping villagers with clean
Right.
water and protecting them from the bad guys. That's excellent fodder for stories, James.
Well, and that's
Ah,
that's the hard. I think it's hard to tell a story because the black and white good versus evil story is, I think, a lot of times people love that kind of story. That's the World War II story
right,
on the surface. But then the story that our generation has grown up with has been this flowing stability and support that transitions into kinetic war that then, oh, today we're not doing that, or rules and conditions
right,
change constantly, or, and that it's hard to make that fun to read about.
right,
Well, and you can kind of do both, right? So like some people, I've gotten reviews accusing me of my characters being two dimensional and blah 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 or whatever, and I'm like, whatever. Okay, you read what you read into it, and I'm glad you read that into it. But I try really hard to give the sides in the galactic conflict depth and not have it just be so terribly one-sided that it's like all like, oh, here are the good guys and here are the bad guys, even though that is essentially what it is. Here are the good guys and here are the bad guys. And
Mhm.
the bad guys aren't bad because they're opposing the good guys. They're bad because they're really, really evil.
Right.
yep,
And their society is evil. And I saw this news anchor on BBC the other night, and she was just like, she's like, I want to put an end to this lie that all cultures are created equal. And the news anchor was like, oh, well, what cultures? What cultures specifically? And the woman was like, well, the ones that believe that women have no rights and children should be married off and raped. And she's like,
hmm,
yeah, but what culture specifically? And the lady's like, I'm not calling out any specific culture. I'm saying the ones that have these ideologies,
right,
and that's just you can respect somebody's culture all you want, but at the end of the day, evil is evil, and it's very naive to have this view of a world where you have evil that exists and then just ignore it and say, well, that's just their preference.
right.
And
Well,
yeah,
and
it's
that's
their preferences that they inflicted upon you. So there is some black and
Different
white,
shades too.
good bad in there, and then but then you've got your shades, right, where it's like, okay, well, how do you perform your mission, and how do you how do you go into their space and how do you justify this and that? Yeah, they may be evil, but do you have the moral high ground in the battles that you're waging? There was a great discussion on Twitter the other day about, or X, about you can tell the good guys from the bad guys by which ones you'd want to be taken prisoner as. You know,
Yeah, I agree with that. I,
do you
I
want to
played
be taken
around with those
prisoner by
concepts.
Japan or do you want to be taken prisoner by America?
I played around with those concepts a lot in Strikers War, and I can't remember if we've ever kind of talked about it on the podcast. I know that I've mentioned it several times when we talk about this kind of thing, but um, so I kind of started Strikers War not as a humanitarian mission, but they were protecting I believe it was a mining operation, and they were protecting the
You like your mining
convoys.
operations.
Yeah. They were protecting convoys and all of those kind of things, and they were being attacked by insurgents. And they, it starts off kind of it's us versus them kind of thing when it comes to the insurgents, and then as you get through further into the story, kind of near the end, and they're doing kind of a more of a deep dive into what's going on. They find out why the insurgents are doing what they're doing, and it it doesn't necessarily paint them as the good guys, because I believe that they were going about it incorrectly in the way that they were doing it. But when you see the other side of, well, the good guys are basically stealing all of this stuff from the local government and the local people and not compensating them and not doing anything, then it becomes like, do we have the moral high ground to do what we're doing? Are we right? And do we still have to do our job? And so those were kind of some, not necessarily themes of the book, because I wanted the theme of the book to be brotherhood, but there were ideas that I wanted to kind of explore. And because there's a lot of back and forth on some of America's missions overseas, and whether or not we were there for the quote unquote the right reasons. Even though I think for the most part the rank and file of the military, they're obviously just following orders and they're doing what they're doing, and but at some level, in some circumstances, there is, I think, a responsibility for the rank and file to say, is this the right thing or not? But
They did
I,
that,
I
and
wanted
then a lot of
to,
them got kicked out.
yeah, no, I know, and it's that's kind of a, what is it, the uh, nature of the beast, right?
You
But
guys remember that story about that special forces operative who beat the hell out of that Iraqi general because he found out what he was doing to his his the
I
boy in
vaguely
his office,
vaguely remember that.
and
Yeah,
they told
vaguely.
him like you need to respect their culture or whatever, and he's like, I'm not going to sit here and let this guy rape an 8-year-old boy.
Yeah,
To hell with that, and they kicked him out for
right.
it. But I mean, like,
I remember the first time somebody told me a story about that. It really messed with me. It was like probably 2003, I want to
oh,
say.
dude,
Like
man,
the
it's
stuff that was happening in Afghanistan, and you're just like, oh my God, I don't know. This could be a
I
whole,
put
yeah,
all the stuff I actually knew about Muslim culture in Afghanistan and Iraq specifically in my books. People would accuse me of Islamophobia more than they already do. And yeah, I do remember I got a review last not a review an email last year on October 9th, and the guy was like, I thought you were making this crap up. I thought you were just an Islamophobe, and you just made all this up. But it was 2 days after October 7th in Israel, and the entire world got to watch what the extremist versions of these people will
oh,
do.
a lot of it's regional, the way people
Yeah.
practice specific things. But
Yeah, so it was just it's I try to keep things realistic in my books and try to keep to history, and I think that's why a big part of what I do is a lot of times is I'll have side missions where they're humanitarian aid or they're rescue missions. Or I had one where there was a ship in trouble and they had to go save the ship because that's what most of the Navy's mission is: freedom of the seas.
yeah,
And if you are in range of a Navy ship and you have an SOS, the Navy will come and help you. And it doesn't matter what country you're from. China relies on the U.S. Navy to protect their global shipping. You know,
One of the things I think it's interesting about um, an aspect of humanitarian missions, especially in circumstances like what's happening on the East Coast right now, is you get to explore a little bit of like base human uh, instinct, or devolution, if you want to call it that, where
evolution. Yeah, yeah,
they resort to very inane kind of brutal tactics to survive. And in some circumstances, those aren't necessarily legitimate, but I think in situations where people are losing homes or fighting for supplies and that kind of thing, though those type of themes are really interesting to explore, that you can do sometimes in just a regular you know force on force enemy action or whatever, but they're really more intricate and interesting, I think, in a situation where the people that are involved are literally fighting for survival or food, and um, just kind of exploring what people are capable of in those situations. The whole adage of getting backed up against a wall, and you don't know. what someone's going to do if they're put in that kind of situation. And when you're uh, wrestling for food for your family, for you to survive or for somebody else to survive, what are you going to do? And what's the moral guidelines for that, right? Like, so in that situation, some two different people can have the exact same moral ground, but have completely different takes on who is the more right.
Right.
And those kind of things are really interesting to play with because it opens up a lot of conversation about, like, is this person right or is this person right, and what would I do in that situation? And some of those things are really fun to explore, and especially in science fiction like we're talking about. And I think I mentioned this last week too. You can kind of explore those themes and those things without really touching real life, and you don't have to really kind of affect people's emotions in a way where you're like having somebody who read the book who's like personally lived through that experience.
Yeah.
And I hesitate to use the word triggered because I don't think that that's the right
Well, it's
word to use,
PTSD
but
for a lot of people. My cousin has PTSD,
yeah.
Katrina. He won't call it
Hmm.
that, but it's what it is.
Yeah, for sure,
Yeah.
100%. Because that, I mean, PTSD is kind of thrown around in combat terms, as the official reason for PTSD is combat or those kind of things. But
Official mental
PTSD,
health problem of the United States Army.
yeah. Well, I mean, but it can honestly, it can come out of anything, any
Well, every
traumatic event
service
that you
member has
have.
PTSD about being late.
What, dude? My kid's getting ready for the bus in the morning. I have like just fits about it because I'm ready to go 15 minutes before the bus gets there. I'm on time, and they're like putting on their
I
backpacks
don't know if
as
you
the bus is
guys
pulling up, and I'm like, oh my God.
gotta go. I don't know if you
Yeah.
guys follow Mandatory Fun Day, but he did a great thing about talking about like being in combat and like what were you getting shot at? Were you afraid? He's like, yeah, and were you what were you in danger? Were you afraid for your life? Were you afraid about getting hurt? Yeah. Well, we better get going. We're gonna be late. Late.
Yeah, 100%.
Right.
So it's great to have all that stuff in there because like I've dealt with PTSD in my books, and I had an officer who was in a really brutal combat situation, and she got transferred onto the interceptor, and she had like a PO that was petty officer that was helping her deal with it, and all those little things that we put in our books that make such a huge difference when people are reading them. I'm like, you've all read books that are just like you read the book and you're like, okay, well that was like a fun action adventure story, but it really didn't go anywhere or mean anything, or and then you read books where it's like you get to the end and you're like, oh my gosh, I have all these concepts now I have to think about and all these things that I need to process about, like what does it mean. And some of the best conflict in any fiction is two people who are both right.
Right. That's what I was going to mention.
100%. There's a really great book series written by Don Bentley. It's a modern day thriller. It's not military science fiction, but the last book or the fourth book in the series, and right now it's the last book. I don't know if there's going to be a fifth, but they're dealing with the withdrawal in Afghanistan, and they're going through it at the end of the book, and of course he changes of the sequence of events a little bit, and he kind of changes the names of the people involved, but he's like, he takes you there and living through that experience. But it's a very real dramatization of the emotions that went on during that time. And I was not there, but I knew people that were, and I know how I felt being an outsider looking in, and the way that he wrote it was so um visceral in terms of just the emotional impact of the during and the after. Um, and so it turned a kind of action adventure spy novel into a really, like, kind of internal reflection on the feelings and emotions and everything that happened there, and those kind of things, those kind of little things give a lot to talk about in a book, because you can say, oh, this book was interesting, it was fun, they went and killed a whole bunch of bad guys, or you can have a conversation and say, yeah, it's a really good book, but this one scene where they did such and such, I felt that in a deep way, and that really creates a lot of conversation around the books, and that's what makes, like Jeff said, makes books great, and kind of solidifies them in the genre, where you can continue to talk about them in ways that's not just, did you read this scene where he did this jump kick on this guy off of a moving semi truck, and
Nobody remembers
you know
that.
what I mean? Like those things are cool and they're interesting, but they don't really tend to drive conversation about
People
things.
remember books that move them emotionally.
For
They don't
sure.
remember books that are cool to read. And part of my journey as an author has been from the beginning trying to write books that so people will remember my name of the author and not just, oh, there's content I need to plow through.
100%.
Because the key to longevity in this business is people remembering who you are, you
It's
know,
tough.
and that's been a problem for authors forever. Every once in a while, I'll be in a bookstore. When I was younger, I was in a bookstore and I'd see a book. I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot I read this whole series. I need to read the next one, and forgot it even came out because it was 3 years since the last book came out, or in Ben
Yeah.
Bova's case, 16 years. And so that's really, is part of the challenge of being an author is, and I always tell people this is that people will pick up your book because the plot sounds cool, but they'll read the next one because the characters resonate with them and they
Right.
mean something to them.
They want to follow those characters.
Well, and like we're saying today, like sometimes it's the events surrounding what the characters do that,
Yeah,
if crafted correctly or used effectively, those events really can drive the conversation as much as the character can. And I don't mean the plot specifically, but just the way that you color the events or use the events in terms of sequences and scenes and stuff. A lot of those individual things can drive a lot. I mean, plots are the same through every book. Like, there's only a certain number of plots that you can throw in terms of like overall story plot. But using, like a humanitarian mission, like we're talking about today, using that as an element or even just a sequence in your book can really, really go towards adding credibility and adding readership conversation to your book.
for sure. I'm actually Grim Legacy is actually part humanitarian mission. So I didn't think about it until we started talking about it, but I realized that yeah, there's a big part of it that is just them doing stuff off mission than they normally do. So that's
Mhm.
Well, and again, like we've said before on the show, like there's so many things that you can put in a book that people find interesting, but when it comes to this specific genre, people who aren't in the military or haven't served might think that whatever event you put in is cool and interesting, but if done correctly and done well, the people that live through those events, um, uh, those will really resonate with them and will really kind of solidify your book as one that they can look back on and go, this book really spoke to me because I lived through those events and did similar things or whatever. And so, not every military member has seen combat or done combat missions or even served in a combat zone. I never got deployed. I was stuck in Wyoming for 6 years. My TDY was to 7 level school, and I just went back to Lackland where I did basic training and tech school at. I never went to anywhere cool. As an officer, I did different things. But I still know what those situations feel like and kind of how they affect soldiers. And so being able to pepper those in your stories. Um, I like the idea of humanitarian missions in fiction in general, but there's so many different elements that you can kind of pound home and use through a backdrop of that that really kind of will elevate the story in really interesting ways rather than just dropping into a combat zone and fighting against the enemy. Be able to play with multiple layers in your story, and I love
And
doing that.
something I'm thinking about, Josh, as you're kind of telling that story, is that the military is a way of thinking. You learn to solve problems in a military manner, which quite often is the most expedient one, using, the tools that you have at hand, learning to assess tools. Um, you know, it was one of the big frustrating things about me when I got out, actually. Like, why the hell doesn't the civilian world like just do things like this? Like, I
Mm.
had meetings at my police department where they'd all be debating radio procedures, and I'd be like, this exists, just use the NATO manual. And they look at me like I'm crazy, like, why?
Yeah,
And I just didn't know that no civilian police department does that. Like, they all just do whatever they want. Um,
right.
and, but things like I don't know, I just feel like it's such an awesome opportunity when, like, I'm also thinking about like whenever in Star Trek, like the Enterprise, it was part of their active mission, but they would show up to a new planet, and it's an opportunity they're going to do some humanitarian mission, but you get to see people operate in a military manner. You get to learn about a new world, which is awesome, and new world building, and that's all cool. And those are all things I love. I love to see characters that I enjoy operating in a way that makes sense to me in a cool environment that could be crazy and weird, and they got to make sense of it. And they don't always have to be killing people, or it could transition in and out of that because they have those skills. But
Well, there's a dramatic difference between how military members interact with the enemy and how military members act with people that they're not trying to kill.
yeah,
And a lot of times, those missions are interesting to deal with in terms of chain of command and rules of engagement and operational standards and all of this thing, because it's, like we've said before, a lot of people think as military is the big hammer that goes in and just pounds everything, but they don't. And their operational procedures when it comes to non-combat operations is very different than what it is for combat operations. And even in the military, a lot of time that switch is very difficult for a lot of people to make.
yeah.
Commanders or people that are in the guard that maybe were active before, and maybe they're a combat veteran and they're not used to doing humanitarian missions. It's you've got to really change that mindset of operations to I'm not hunting down people to kill them. I'm searching for people to save them. And that's they're similar in terms of how you accomplish them, but the mindset is extremely different. And those different takes and approaches to the mission is really an interesting, also a thing to play with in your stories, just because there could be conflict if the group commander or whatever is leading the thing. If he's a combat commander, he's going to be hard charging and all of this, but that's might not be what the situation needs. It might need some TLC, and generally speaking, TLC is not something that the military is really familiar with.
Well, it's a way you could
And
a character reaches a certain point, right? And they're kind of overpowered, and you can kind of nerf them by putting them in a humanitarian mission. And now
oh
they need
yeah,
to learn to adjust all those skills that they were successful with, but now if they don't make that work, they're not going to succeed. So what can they do to adapt? Which
100%.
This is a perfect example of this. I'm not going to go into too much detail in the story because we're running out of time. But look up Jake McNasty from World War II. Dude was an absolute train wreck in his personal life. Absolute train wreck. Train wreck. Joined the army during World War II. Fought in every major battle in World War II, from D-Day to the Battle of the Bulge. Jumped behind enemy lines. Just wreaked havoc on the German infrastructure single-handedly. Basically won the Battle of the Bulge by running around the city. I forget the name of the city that was at the center of it, calling in airdrops for supplies to the airborne, and like moving, all day, every day for hours to call down airdrops so they could keep fighting.
It's
And
Bastogne.
it's just like, and then he goes home and he's an alcoholic and he gets in a car accident and he, gets in bar fights and just continues his train wreck life. But boy, in the army, he was just awesome.
Jake
Well,
McNeat, they
until
call
he
him nasty.
Yeah.
it was the Battle of it was Bastogne at the Battle of
Yeah.
the Bulge, and then I'm looking at the Wikipedia article. He's got 2 Purple Hearts, 4 Bronze Stars, the Legion of Honor. He was a first sergeant acting only.
He was
But
a
he got
private and acted as first sergeant.
yeah he got kicked out in 1946 for fighting the MPs.
Yeah,
So
he
that's
got
really
wounded in his
interesting.
eye, and he went to the base, and they're gonna fix his eye or whatever. And then he got drunk, and he fought with the MPs, and the base commander's like, "Oh, if you ever come back here, we're gonna throw you in jail." He's like, "If you ever come back here, I'm gonna kick your butt." And they're
Yeah,
like, "You're out of the army."
right. It's so interesting. There's so many, I think so many career paths you can choose that kind of stuff happens. But in the military, you can do 18 good things and you do one bad thing and you're
Yeah,
done.
yeah,
And there's so many people in the military that do 18 bad things and never get caught. And then they do, like you're saying, Jeff, they do one good thing and they get put up for the Medal of Honor or something. And you're like, this guy's a piece of crap.
yeah.
Like, what are you talking about?
I
It's one of
never got a
the
DUI. Damn it.
Right. You mentioned the problem with the paperwork in the army and all of that, and,
Yeah.
and that I think that's military wide. But it's so interesting when you talk about oh, this file got lost. And you're like, that couldn't happen. It happens all the time. People lose files, or people, when you get enlisted performance reports, like your yearly review as a soldier, an airman, or whatever. And it's just, when I started writing them, it was so funny to see how those things actually got processed, because it's a record of your service, and it's a record of what you did, and your accomplishments or whatever. But a lot of that stuff's kind of curated. If they don't like you, the delete button's really easy to hit, and the changing the words from exemplary performer to standard performer meets standards is really easy. And a lot of times those things are edited by people that they don't even know the guy. Like, they have no idea. And it's just interesting when you talk about paperwork, how kind of crazy it is in the military.
I had to get my complete set of vaccinations 3 times because I got them once when I joined, got to my permanent duty station, and they're like, Haskell, you don't have your vaccinations. I'm like, yeah, I do. Well, they're not in the paperwork. You have to go get them again. So I got
Go get them again, right? Yeah.
Then a year later in the annual review, they're like, you don't have your vaccinations. I'm like, are you kidding me? So who knows what that did to me?
I know.
Oh, you're super safe now, man. You're super
I had to
vaccinated.
get 2 sets of anthrax because they lost. Yeah,
I
That's
never
the
had to get
paperwork.
anthrax.
I'm surprised.
I got all the vaccinations to go to Southeast Asia, but I ended up not going, and that made me sick for like 6 weeks. So,
Yeah,
but
it's funny because you think that things like that would get better over time. Some things get worse, like people can't, like your medical records are making it harder and harder to join the military, but then other stuff gets lost while you're in, and it just, I don't know. The guy that's like dogging on you about things being 1,000 years in the future, Jeff, some things, like, we'll be robots, swimming around in like jellyfish bodies, and we'll still lose paperwork.
Oh,
And
also,
100%.
it's just not fun to write about.
well,
Or
that
read,
Yeah.
too, yeah.
you
I
know.
mean,
I
I
mean,
just think certain things are human, and like the military losing paperwork, it just seems to
it's
be
just how it's going to be. Yeah,
the way humans
I
do.
went 1,000 years in the future because I didn't want to have to deal with 100 years in the future or 200 years in the future. I didn't want to talk about modern day events as if they just happened. How often do we talk about um, Charlemagne becoming the king of the Holy Roman Emperor? Because that's about 1,000 years ago, right? And
Right.
We don't
we
talk
never
about
talk
it.
about it.
I was just
So I went 1,000 years in the future, and I purposely do not talk about anything that happened in the 20th century because personally, I hate it when novels do that.
Well, and it's also interesting when you talk about like that, like 1,000 years, like, whoa, but also you look at like the historical traditions of the military and how long they have held. And so when you talk about things that, you put a story 1,000 years in the future, and people are like, oh, this is unrealistic. They're not doing whatever it is, A, B, or C. And you're like, they were doing this in like the 1500s, or
Yeah.
the 900s or whatever. These are military traditions that have carried forward for thousands of years. Why wouldn't they carry forward thousands of years more? Sure, they might be different, and they may be presented differently, or appear differently, but the I think those traditions are still going to hold true,
But you're
as
also
long
reading the
as
book in standard American English. So I mean, like, what do you mean, create a whole new language? I mean, like, at what point
right.
do you want?
Right.
At what point do you want to just like suspend your disbelief and enjoy the book
Yeah.
the way it
Oh
was
yeah,
written?
100%. 100%.
Yeah. I guess I had a rant there.
dumb
No, I
emails
love
that go about
rants.
like
Hey,
$5 each. Like, you pay
yeah.
me $5, you can send me a dumb email.
Hey, you know what? I always say, no matter what the email says, I always say thank you so much
I
for
know.
taking the time to read my book and comment on it. That means a lot to me because it does. If you hate my book, that's fine. You spent your hard-earned money on it, and I appreciate that. So don't make it sound like I'm one of those whining about getting bad reviews because I don't get bad reviews. I get reviews, and some of them are.
It'd be interesting to hear what that reader thinks about Dune, and their use of technology, because Dune is like whatever 10,000 years or something in the future, and they're
It's
still
10,000 years from the Robot Wars.
right, right.
So
That's
who
what.
knows how long? I think
Ooh,
someone said once it was like 15 or 20,000 years in the future from us. So
yeah, and they were still dealing with things that
yeah,
we deal with. A
I
great
mean,
example of that is The
humans are
Empire of
humans.
Silence,
You know,
or the Sun Eater series by Chris Rucchio. Actually, I have the book right back there, but his book is set 10,000 something odd years in the future, and they still deal with that kind of stuff: lost paperwork, or incompetent leaders, or
yeah.
mistakes happening. All that
Because
stuff still
humans,
exists.
despite what people like to say, like, oh, we've evolved, we haven't evolved, and we're not going
No,
to
no,
evolve because we
no.
don't evolve.
Yeah,
We have the same mentality that we've had for since we've stepped out of the pool or out of the garden, depending on what you
Yeah.
believe.
That's what's kind of
Right.
fascinating. Like there was just some study that came out recently that they were basically talking about that very fact that like our brains are not that much different than they were 10,000 years ago. And if you took a human from that time period, like, obviously they would have to adapt, but we're not that much different than they are. So that was very
If you
interesting.
want to know what humans were like 1,000 years ago, or 1,500 years ago, or 3,000 years ago, all you have to do is deprive them of electricity, food, and water for 3 days,
Right.
and you will
No,
learn.
and that's what I was saying about the base kind of human instinct of something that you get thrown into a situation where people just they go back to the caveman hunter gatherer survival tactics of
Ask the
surviving
people
and
in
providing.
the New Orleans Saints Dome,
Oh yeah,
how evolved
Might
100%.
humans
actually
are.
get to when we talk about humanitarian aid, like we want to stay human, right? We don't want to turn into animals. So
Yeah.
that's what you're you're helping people do. Your characters are in that situation,
Yeah.
which might be a good place to pause. So thank you for hanging out
Pause.
with us.
Oh yeah,
I know.
end it.
Pause until next time. Um, Thanks for hanging out with us. We hope that everything's going okay in Florida. I hope by the time next week we'll have good news to talk about.
Yeah, also, I want to do a quick shout out. Kevin Eikenberry, one of my friends, of an author, recently released a book called Steel on Target, The Buzzard War. Check it out. It's on Amazon right now. It's a fantastic novel. I've read it. I helped him write the blurb. I can't recommend it enough. I also am partially responsible for him writing it because I convinced him at 20 books a couple years back, about 3 o'clock in the morning, that he needed to write it because I was sure that military sci-fi would love a tank story, and
it's a
he is
tanker
a
story, right? Yeah.
30-year veteran of Abrams tanks. So check out Steel on Target, available on Amazon and everywhere fine books are sold.
Nice.
As long as it's Amazon.
James, I'll send you the link if you want to put that in the description or whatever.
Okay. Yes, I will do that. All right. And if you got some books you want to share, we always love book recommendations. So check us out in the Discord. That link, YouTube doesn't seem to be replacing it like they were before. So that's good. If you go to the YouTube comments, you can find the link to our Discord, as well as our books and all the good stuff of that nature. So, all right. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next time. Rick should be back next week. So later.
I forgot about him.
Truck troopers fall through an endless sky. Military science, science fiction contest. Reaction in the system on fire. Military science, science fiction contest. Short stories every Wednesday. Military science fiction contest. Discussion, interviews, reviews, and rants. Military science fiction contest. Load up, troopers on a hit and jump gate. Military science fiction contest. Discussion, interviews, reviews, and rants. Military science fiction contest. Load up, troop, it's time to hit the jump gate. Military science fiction contest. Reaction to the system on fire.